Question 1. Process analysis reveals that client with a progressive neurological condition expresses a strong preference for a lightweight, non-motorized scooter for community mobility, despite a recent history of balance issues and limited upper body strength. The ATP has identified that a power wheelchair might offer greater stability and independence in the long term, but the client perceives it as more cumbersome and less socially acceptable. What is the most appropriate course of action for the ATP? Option A. Suggest a trial period with the lightweight scooter and defer further discussion about other mobility options until the client expresses dissatisfaction. Option B. Conduct a thorough functional assessment of the client's current balance, endurance, and upper body strength, and explore the client's specific concerns about the power wheelchair, while presenting evidence-based information on the long-term benefits and safety features of both options. Option C. Immediately recommend the lightweight scooter as requested by the client, prioritizing their expressed preference to ensure client satisfaction. Option D. Advise the client that the power wheelchair is the only safe option and proceed with its prescription, overriding the client's preference due to perceived safety risks. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough functional assessment of the client's current balance, endurance, and upper body strength, and explore the client's specific concerns about the power wheelchair, while presenting evidence-based information on the long-term benefits and safety features of both options. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the client's expressed preferences with the ATP's professional judgment regarding safety and functional independence, all within the scope of established best practices for mobility aid assessment. The ATP must navigate potential conflicts between a client's desire for a specific device and the device's suitability for their current physical and environmental needs. Careful judgment is required to ensure the chosen mobility aid enhances, rather than compromises, the client's quality of life and safety. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, client-centered assessment that considers multiple factors beyond the client's initial request. This includes a thorough evaluation of the client's physical capabilities, home environment, community access needs, and potential for future changes. By involving the client in the decision-making process after presenting evidence-based options and their implications, the ATP upholds ethical principles of autonomy and beneficence. This aligns with the ATP certification's emphasis on evidence-based practice and client advocacy, ensuring the selected mobility aid is not only desired, but also appropriate and safe. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the client's initial request without further assessment fails to meet professional standards. This could lead to the provision of an inappropriate mobility aid, potentially causing harm, increasing fall risk, or hindering functional independence, thereby violating the principle of non-maleficence. Another incorrect approach that imposes a solution without adequate client consultation disregards the client's autonomy and right to participate in decisions about their own care, which is a cornerstone of ethical practice. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes cost-effectiveness over the client's functional needs and safety would be ethically unsound, as the primary goal of assistive technology is to improve the client's well-being and independence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with active listening to the client's needs and preferences. This should be followed by a systematic assessment of the client's physical, cognitive, and environmental factors. Based on this assessment, the ATP should research and identify appropriate assistive technology options, considering their efficacy, safety, and suitability. The ATP then presents these options to the client, explaining the pros and cons of each in relation to their specific needs and goals. Collaborative decision-making, where the client's informed choice is paramount, should guide the final selection, with ongoing follow-up to ensure the chosen technology is meeting expectations and needs. Question 2. The evaluation methodology shows a commitment to gathering comprehensive information to inform assistive technology recommendations. Which of the following data collection and analysis strategies best exemplifies a client-centered and evidence-based approach within the ATP certification framework? Option A. Relying primarily on the client's self-reported needs and preferences during an initial interview, with minimal objective data collection, to expedite the recommendation process. Option B. Gathering only readily available information from previous medical records and a brief observation of the client performing a single, isolated task. Option C. conducting a series of standardized cognitive and motor assessments in a clinical setting, with limited consideration for the client's daily routines or environmental factors. Option D, implementing a multi-method data collection strategy that includes direct observation in the client's natural environment, structured interviews with the client and relevant stakeholders, and the use of validated functional assessment tools, followed by a qualitative and quantitative analysis to identify patterns and support evidence-based recommendations. The correct answer is D, implementing a multi-method data collection strategy that includes direct observation in the client's natural environment, structured interviews with the client and relevant stakeholders, and the use of validated functional assessment tools, followed by a qualitative and quantitative analysis to identify patterns and support evidence-based recommendations. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in assistive technology at service delivery, balancing the need for comprehensive data collection with the practical constraints of time, resources, and the client's engagement. The professional must ensure that the data gathered is not only relevant and accurate, but also collected ethically, and in a manner that respects the client's autonomy and privacy, adhering to the standards set forth by the assistive technology professional at certification. The challenge lies in selecting a data collection strategy that maximizes the utility of the information for informed decision-making without overwhelming the client or compromising the integrity of the assessment. The correct approach prioritizes a systematic, client-centered, and contextually relevant data collection process. This aligns with best professional practices by ensuring that the assessment is thorough, objective, and directly addresses the client's functional needs and goals. It emphasizes the use of validated tools and methods that are appropriate for the specific intervention being considered, thereby enhancing the reliability and validity of the findings. This approach is ethically sound, as it respects the client's right to informed participation and ensures that decisions are based on robust evidence, minimizing the risk of inappropriate recommendations. Regulatory frameworks for professionals typically mandate evidence-based practice and client-centered care, which this approach embodies. An incorrect approach that relies solely on anecdotal observations without structured data collection is ethically problematic because it lacks objectivity and can lead to biased recommendations. This fails to meet the professional standard of evidence-based practice, potentially violating guidelines that require systematic assessment. Another incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on standardized tests without considering the client's functional environment or personal preferences overlooks the holistic nature of assessment. This can result in recommendations that are technically sound but not practically useful or desired by the client, failing to uphold the client-centered principles mandated by ethical codes. An approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness, collecting only minimal data, risks making decisions based on incomplete information. This can lead to ineffective solutions, wasted resources, and potential harm to the client, representing a failure to exercise due diligence and professional responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the assessment goals in collaboration with the client. This involves identifying the specific functional limitations and desired outcomes. Next, the professional should select appropriate data collection methods that are both valid and reliable, considering the client's context, preferences, and the nature of the intervention. This includes a mix of direct observation, client interviews, functional assessments, and potentially standardized tools, all conducted with informed consent. The collected data should then be analyzed systematically to identify patterns, strengths, and areas requiring its support. Finally, the analysis should inform a set of recommendations that are evidence-based, client-centered, and aligned with the initial goals. Question 3. During the evaluation of a client's needs for assistive technology, which approach best exemplifies a client-centered decision-making framework for selecting and implementing a solution? Option A. Selecting the assistive technology that the client initially expresses a strong preference for, without conducting a thorough functional assessment or exploring alternative solutions. Option B. Making the final decision on the assistive technology independently after a brief assessment, based on the ATP's professional judgment of what is best for the client. Option C. Presenting a range of suitable assistive technology options, discussing their respective benefits, drawbacks, and costs, and collaboratively selecting the most appropriate solution with the client based on their goals and functional needs. Option D, recommending the most technologically advanced assistive technology available that addresses the client's primary stated need, assuming it will provide the greatest benefit. The correct answer is C, presenting a range of suitable assistive technology options, discussing their respective benefits, drawbacks, and costs, and collaboratively selecting the most appropriate solution with the client based on their goals and functional needs. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because the assistive technology professional must balance the client's expressed preferences with the objective assessment of functional needs and the practicalities of technology integration within the client's existing environment and support system. The ATP's role is to facilitate informed decision-making, not to dictate solutions. The core ethical and professional responsibility is to ensure the selected AT is appropriate, effective, and promotes the client's independence and quality of life, while adhering to professional standards and any applicable regulations regarding client rights and informed consent. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a collaborative, client-centered process. This involves a thorough assessment of the client's goals, environment, and current abilities, followed by the exploration of multiple AT options that address identified needs, presenting a range of suitable options, discussing their pros and cons, and involving the client in the final selection ensures that the decision is informed and aligned with their values and preferences. This aligns with ethical principles of autonomy and beneficence, and professional guidelines that emphasize client participation in the AT selection process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most technologically advanced or expensive option fails to consider the client's actual needs, budget, or ability to learn and use the technology effectively. This can lead to abandonment of the device and wasted resources, violating the principle of providing appropriate and effective solutions. Ethically, it disregards the client's autonomy and may be seen as a failure to act in their best interest. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on the client's initial stated preference, without a comprehensive assessment risks, selecting an AT that does not adequately address underlying functional limitations, or may be impractical for their daily life. This can lead to frustration and unmet needs, failing to uphold the professional obligation to provide effective AT solutions. It may also overlook potential contraindications or limitations of the preferred technology. A third incorrect approach that involves making the decision unilaterally, without sufficient client input or explanation of alternatives, undermines the client's right to self-determination and informed consent. This is a significant ethical failure, as it removes the client from the decision-making process that directly impacts their life and independence. It also fails to leverage the client's unique knowledge of their own needs and preferences. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic, client-centered framework. This begins with a comprehensive needs assessment, considering functional abilities, environmental factors, and personal goals. Next, potential AT solutions should be identified and evaluated based on their efficacy, usability, cost, and compatibility with the client's lifestyle. Crucially, this information must be presented to the client in an understandable manner, facilitating a discussion of options, risks, and benefits. The final decision should be a collaborative one, respecting the client's informed choice, with ongoing follow-up to ensure satisfaction and effectiveness. Question 4. Stakeholder feedback indicates a strong preference for a specific type of communication device, but the individual's current functional assessment suggests that a different category of AT might offer greater long-term benefits for their evolving needs. What is the most appropriate professional approach to resolving this discrepancy? Option A. Prioritize the stakeholder's preferred device, assuming their understanding of the individual's desires outweighs the functional assessment findings. Option B. Conduct a further assessment to explore how the preferred device could be adapted or supplemented to meet the identified functional needs, while also evaluating alternative AT solutions that address the full spectrum of functional requirements. Option C. Recommend the most advanced and feature-rich communication device available, regardless of the specific functional assessment or stakeholder preferences. Option D. Select a communication device that is readily available through existing funding streams, even if it does not fully align with the functional assessment or stakeholder preferences. The correct answer is B. Conduct a further assessment to explore how the preferred device could be adapted or supplemented to meet the identified functional needs, while also evaluating alternative solutions that address the full spectrum of functional requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the diverse needs and preferences of multiple stakeholders, including the end user, their family, and potentially funding agencies, while adhering to the principles of best practice in assistive technology provision. The challenge lies in synthesizing this feedback into a cohesive and effective solution that is not only functional, but also user-centered and compliant with relevant guidelines. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based evaluation process that integrates stakeholder input directly into the selection and justification of assistive technology. This aligns with the core ethical principles of client-centered care and professional responsibility to select appropriate based on functional needs and evidence of efficacy. It demonstrates a commitment to a thorough assessment that considers the individual's specific context and goals, ensuring the chosen technology is a good fit and likely to yield positive outcomes. This approach is implicitly supported by professional standards that emphasize comprehensive assessment and individualized intervention. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails by overemphasizing a single stakeholder's preference without a comprehensive functional assessment. This can lead to the selection of that is not truly appropriate for the individual's needs, potentially resulting in underutilization, frustration, and wasted resources. Ethically, this violates the principle of client-centered practice by not ensuring the solution is functionally beneficial. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the perceived latest or most advanced technology without a clear link to the individual's specific functional goals and needs. This can lead to the selection of overly complex or inappropriate which may not be user-friendly, cost-effective, or even necessary. This approach risks violating professional responsibility to provide appropriate and evidence-based interventions. A further incorrect approach involves making a decision based on the availability of funding or the ease of procurement, rather than the optimal functional outcome for the individual. This prioritizes administrative or financial considerations over the client's well-being and functional independence, which is a significant ethical lapse and a failure of professional duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough needs assessment, actively solicits and integrates stakeholder feedback, researches and evaluates potential solutions based on evidence of efficacy and functional appropriateness, and finally, selects the most suitable that aligns with the individual's goals and context. This process should be iterative and involve ongoing monitoring and adjustment. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that an assistive technology professional is tasked with selecting a new communication device for a client with severe speech impairment. The client has expressed a strong preference for a device based on its aesthetic appeal and ease of initial setup, as demonstrated in online reviews. The ATP is aware of several devices that meet the client's functional communication needs, but their compliance with international standards for assistive technology, such as ISO 9999, varies. Which approach best aligns with the ATP's professional responsibilities and the principles of the ATP certification? Option A. Rely primarily on marketing materials and anecdotal evidence from online reviews to identify a device that appears to meet the client's needs, without independently verifying its compliance with international standards. Option B. Select the device that the client prefers based on aesthetic appeal and ease of setup, as indicated by online reviews, assuming that client satisfaction is the primary determinant of success. Option C. Choose the least expensive device that meets the client's basic functional communication needs, as cost-effectiveness is paramount in assistive technology provision. Option D. Prioritize selecting a device that strictly adheres to relevant ISO standards for assistive technology, ensuring it meets established criteria for classification, terminology, safety, and performance, while also considering the client's functional needs and preferences. The correct answer is D. Prioritize selecting a device that strictly adheres to relevant ISO standards for assistive technology, ensuring it meets established criteria for classification, terminology, safety, and performance, while also considering the client's functional needs and preferences. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for assistive technology professionals when selecting devices for clients. balancing client needs with the evolving landscape of international standards. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the chosen technology not only meets the immediate functional requirements of the client, but also adheres to established quality and safety benchmarks, thereby promoting long-term efficacy and user confidence. Careful judgment is required to navigate the complexities of international standards, which can vary in their adoption and interpretation across different regions, even if the ATP certification itself is globally recognized. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to relevant ISO standards for assistive technology. Specifically, ISO 9999, Assistive Products, Classification and Terminology, provides a framework for categorizing and describing assistive products, ensuring clarity and consistency in communication and product development. Furthermore, ISO standards related to usability, safety, and performance e.g., ISO 22300 series for security and resilience, or specific standards for medical devices if applicable, are crucial for ensuring the selected technology is reliable, safe, and effective. By consulting and applying these standards, the ATP demonstrates a commitment to evidence-based practice, client safety, and the ethical provision of assistive technology, aligning with the core principles of the ATP certification, which emphasizes competence and ethical conduct. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on client preference, without considering established standards, fails to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure the safety and efficacy of the assistive technology. This could lead to the selection of a device that, while appealing to the client, may not meet critical safety regulations or performance benchmarks, potentially causing harm or suboptimal outcomes. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the lowest cost without evaluating compliance with ISO standards overlooks the potential long-term costs associated with unreliable or non-compliant technology, including maintenance, replacement, and potential negative impacts on the client's well-being and independence. This approach also neglects the ethical obligation to provide value and ensure the durability and appropriateness of the assistive solution. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or marketing claims without verifying against ISO standards risks selecting technology that is not rigorously tested or validated, potentially leading to client dissatisfaction and a failure to meet their assistive needs effectively. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a departure from evidence-based practice. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of client needs, followed by a thorough research of available assistive technologies. This research must include a critical assessment of how each potential technology aligns with relevant ISO standards, as well as any applicable national or regional regulation. The ATP should engage in a collaborative discussion with the client, explaining the rationale behind the technology selection, including how it meets both functional requirements and established quality and safety benchmarks. This ensures informed consent and empowers the client in the decision-making process. Question 6. Regulatory review indicates that an assistive technology professional is evaluating a client for a new communication device. The client has expressed frustration with their current device's limitations in social settings, but has also provided specific examples of features they find cumbersome. The ATP has access to standardized assessment tools that measure speech intelligibility and response time, as well as the ability to conduct in-depth interviews and observe the client interacting in a simulated social environment, which approach best balances the need for comprehensive understanding with ethical considerations for client-centered service delivery. Option A. Integrate findings from standardized assessments with insights gained from in-depth interviews and observations of the client's functional use of AI in relevant environments to develop a comprehensive understanding for recommendations. Option B. Conduct in-depth interviews to understand the client's subjective experiences and frustrations, and observe their interactions in a simulated social environment to gather qualitative insights, using these to inform recommendations. Option C. Primarily utilize standardized assessments to objectively measure speech intelligibility and response time, and base recommendations solely on these quantitative metrics. Option D. Rely on the client's anecdotal descriptions of device limitations and preferences without seeking further objective or observational data, as this represents their direct experience. The correct answer is C. primarily utilize standardized assessments to objectively measure speech intelligibility and response time, and base recommendations solely on these quantitative metrics. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an assistive technology professional ATP to balance the need for comprehensive client understanding with the ethical imperative of respecting client autonomy and privacy. The ATP must decide how to gather information that will best inform their recommendations without overstepping boundaries or relying solely on data that might not fully capture the client's lived experience. Careful judgment is required to select the most appropriate data collection methods that align with professional standards and client well-being. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic understanding of the client's needs and preferences, which is fundamental to effective service delivery. By combining qualitative data, such as client interviews and observations of their daily activities, with quantitative data, like standardized assessments of functional abilities, the ATP can gain a richer, more nuanced picture. This approach is ethically justified by the principles of client-centered care and informed consent, ensuring that recommendations are truly tailored to the individual. It aligns with the overarching goal of ATP provision, which is to enhance independence and participation, requiring more than just numerical scores. An incorrect approach that relies exclusively on quantitative data fails to capture the subjective experiences, motivations, and environmental factors that significantly impact effectiveness. This can lead to recommendations that are technically sound but practically unworkable or undesirable for the client, violating the principle of client autonomy. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on qualitative data might lack the objective benchmarks needed to track progress or compare the efficacy of different options, potentially leading to less informed or less evidence-based recommendations. Both of these approaches risk misinterpreting the client's needs and can lead to suboptimal outcomes, potentially breaching ethical obligations to provide competent and appropriate services. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the service goals in collaboration with the client. This involves identifying the specific functional areas to be addressed and the desired outcomes. Next, the ATP should consider the strengths and limitations of various data collection methods, evaluating how each method can contribute to understanding both objective performance and subjective experience. The selection of methods should be guided by the principle of proportionality, ensuring that the data gathered is relevant and necessary for informed decision-making, while always respecting client privacy and consent. Finally, the ATP must integrate the gathered data thoughtfully, using both qualitative insights and quantitative measures to formulate recommendations that are both evidence-based and client-preferred. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of inconsistent performance data from a specific model of a powered wheelchair used by multiple clients, with reports of unexpected battery drain and intermittent loss of motor control. As an what is the most appropriate initial step to take in interpreting and reporting this data, adhering strictly to the ATP certification's regulatory framework and ethical guidelines? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal review of the collected performance data, cross-referencing it with manufacturer specifications, client usage logs, and any reported incidents to determine the scope and potential cause of the performance issues before considering external reporting. Option B. Classify the data as a minor anomaly and monitor future performance without immediate further action, assuming it is a temporary fluctuation. Option C. Immediately report the observed performance inconsistencies to the relevant regulatory agency, as any indication of device malfunction requires prompt official notification. Option D. Disseminate the raw performance data to other ATPs and at users within a professional network to solicit their opinions and experiences with the same device model. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough internal review of the collected performance data, cross-referencing it with manufacturer specifications, client usage logs, and any reported incidents to determine the scope and potential cause of the performance issues before considering external reporting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an assistive technology professional to navigate the delicate balance between client privacy, data integrity, and the regulatory requirements for reporting adverse events or significant changes in assistive technology, At performance, the ATP must interpret data that could indicate a potential safety concern or a significant deviation from expected functionality, which has implications for client well-being and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the severity and scope of the issue, determining the appropriate reporting pathway, and ensuring that all actions are taken in accordance with the governing regulatory framework for AT professionals. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective interpretation of the collected data, cross-referencing it with established performance benchmarks and client-reported outcomes. This approach aligns with the ethical obligations of an ATP to ensure client safety and the effectiveness of AT interventions. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of professional responsibility and due diligence mandated by the ATP certification standards, which require professionals to act in the best interest of their clients and to report any issues that could compromise client safety or AT efficacy. This systematic review ensures that any potential adverse events or significant functional declines are identified and addressed promptly and appropriately, minimizing risk to the client and fulfilling reporting obligations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately escalating the issue to regulatory bodies without a preliminary internal review. This bypasses the crucial step of data validation and contextualization, potentially leading to unnecessary investigations and resource misallocation. It also fails to uphold the professional responsibility to first attempt to understand, and if possible, resolve the issue at the client or provider level, which is often the most efficient and client-centered solution. This approach could be seen as a failure of due diligence and a lack of professional judgment in assessing the true nature and severity of the reported data. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the data as an anomaly without further investigation, especially if it contradicts initial assessments or expectations. This demonstrates a failure to critically evaluate all available information and a potential bias towards pre-existing conclusions. Ethically, this is unacceptable as it prioritizes convenience or confirmation bias over client safety and the integrity of its services. Regulatory frameworks often require a proactive approach to identifying and reporting potential issues, and ignoring data that suggests a problem is a direct contravention of this principle. A third incorrect approach is to share the raw, uninterpreted data with external parties, including other clients or non-authorized personnel, without proper anonymization or consent. This constitutes a severe breach of client confidentiality and privacy, violating fundamental ethical principles and potentially specific data protection regulations applicable to healthcare and AT services. The ATP has a duty to protect sensitive client information, and any disclosure must be strictly controlled and justified by regulatory or ethical requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must gather all relevant data and context surrounding the reported issue. Second, they should objectively analyze this data against established standards, client goals, and previous performance metrics. Third, they must consult the relevant ATP certification guidelines and any applicable local or national regulations pertaining to AT device performance, adverse event reporting, and client data privacy. Fourth, based on this analysis, they should determine the appropriate course of action, which may include further investigation, client consultation, internal reporting, or external reporting to regulatory bodies. Throughout this process, maintaining client confidentiality and acting with professional integrity are paramount. Question 8. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client with a progressive neurological condition expresses a strong preference for a specific, high-end communication device they saw advertised, despite having limited prior experience with augmentative and alternative communication AUX systems. The ATP has assessed the client's current functional needs and believes a simpler, more adaptable system might be more appropriate for their immediate needs and future progression. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for assistive technology provision? Option A. Conduct a thorough trial of the client's preferred device alongside other suitable options, educating the client on the features, benefits, and potential limitations of each, and collaboratively determining the best fit based on functional outcomes and client satisfaction. Option B. Immediately recommend the client's preferred device, as their stated preference is the primary determinant of the assistive technology solution. Option C. Proceed with recommending the most technologically advanced system available, assuming that higher cost and complexity will inherently lead to better long-term outcomes for a progressive condition. Option D. Advise the client that their preferred device is likely too complex and recommend a basic, less expensive alternative without extensive exploration of other options. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough trial of the client's preferred device alongside other suitable options, educating the client on the features, benefits, and potential limitations of each, and collaboratively determining the best fit based on functional outcomes and client satisfaction. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing a client's stated preference with a professional's assessment of optimal functional outcomes, all within the context of assistive technology provision. The ATP must navigate potential biases, ensure client autonomy, and adhere to ethical guidelines that prioritize the client's well-being and independence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, client-centered assessment process. This involves understanding the user's specific needs, environmental context, and functional goals before recommending technology. It emphasizes collaboration with the client, exploring multiple viable options, and ensuring the chosen technology is a good fit for their unique situation. This aligns with ethical principles of informed consent, client self-determination, and the provision of appropriate and effective services. An incorrect approach that solely relies on the client's initial, potentially uninformed preference fails to uphold the ATP's professional responsibility to provide expert guidance. It risks recommending a suboptimal solution that may not meet the client's underlying needs, leading to frustration, decreased independence, and wasted resources. This could be considered an ethical failure by not acting in the client's best interest and potentially violating principles of competence and due care. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the most technologically advanced or expensive option without a clear justification based on the client's needs is also professionally unacceptable. This could lead to overservicing, financial burden on the client or funding sources, and a technology that is too complex or inappropriate for the user's abilities or environment. This violates principles of fiscal responsibility and the ethical imperative to provide value and appropriate solutions. A further incorrect approach that dismisses the client's input entirely in favor of the ATP's preconceived notions or past experiences with similar clients overlooks the individuality of each user. While experience is valuable, it should inform, not dictate, the assessment. Failing to actively listen to and incorporate the client's perspective can lead to a lack of buy-in and a technology that is not adopted or used effectively, ultimately failing to achieve the desired functional outcomes. This disregards the ethical principle of respecting client autonomy and partnership. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured, multi-step approach. 1. Initiate a thorough needs assessment, actively listening to the client's stated goals, challenges, and preferences. 2. Conduct an environmental assessment to understand the context in which the technology will be used. 3. Explore a range of assistive technology options that could potentially meet the identified needs, considering various features, functionalities, and cost-effectiveness. 4. Present these options to the client, explaining the pros and cons of each in relation to their specific situation, facilitating informed decision-making. 5. Collaboratively select the most appropriate technology, ensuring the client feels empowered and has a clear understanding of the chosen solution. 6. Plan for implementation, training, and ongoing support to maximize the technology's effectiveness and the client's satisfaction. Question 9. Implementation of an assistive technology solution for a client with complex mobility and communication needs requires the assistive technology professional to consider various development pathways. The client's family expresses a strong preference for a solution that is entirely unique and built from the ground up to address every perceived nuance of the client's situation, believing this will offer the highest level of personalization and effectiveness. The ATP has identified several commercially available integrated systems that, with minor adaptations, could potentially meet the majority of the client's core functional requirements. Which of the following represents the most professionally sound approach for the ATP in this situation? Option A. Immediately begin the process of designing and developing a completely custom-built solution, as requested by the client's family, to ensure maximum personalization and address all perceived unique requirements. Option B. Focus solely on the client's expressed preference for a custom solution, prioritizing its development over exploring any commercially available alternatives to ensure client satisfaction with the process. Option C. Recommend the most advanced and feature-rich commercially available system, assuming it will cover all potential needs, without further in-depth assessment of the client's specific functional requirements beyond the initial request. Option D. Thoroughly evaluate the commercially available integrated systems, documenting how each addresses the client's core needs, and present these options alongside a detailed analysis of the potential benefits and drawbacks of a custom-built solution, allowing the client and family to make an informed decision. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly evaluate the commercially available integrated systems, documenting how each addresses the client's core needs, and present these options alongside a detailed analysis of the potential benefits and drawbacks of a custom-built solution, allowing the client and family to make an informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for assistive technology professionals, where a client's needs must be met within the constraints of available resources and established best practices. The core tension lies between the potential for a highly tailored, custom solution and the practicality and accessibility of a commercially available product. The ATP must balance the ideal outcome for the client with factors such as cost, maintenance, training, and long-term support, all while adhering to professional ethical guidelines and potentially funding regulations. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough needs assessment and a systematic evaluation of both custom and commercial options against those identified needs. This aligns with the ethical imperative to act in the client's best interest, ensuring that the chosen solution is not only effective but also appropriate and sustainable. It reflects a commitment to evidence-based practice, where decisions are driven by client outcomes and a comprehensive understanding of available technologies. This approach also implicitly considers the principles of least restrictive intervention, aiming for the most effective solution with the least amount of modification or complexity, which can also be a factor in funding approvals and long-term usability. An incorrect approach that immediately defaults to a custom solution without exploring commercial alternatives fails to demonstrate due diligence. This could lead to unnecessary expense, longer development times, and potential issues with ongoing support and compatibility, all of which are detrimental to the client's well-being and may violate principles of fiscal responsibility if public funding is involved. Ethically, it could be seen as a failure to explore all reasonable options, potentially leading to a suboptimal outcome for the client. Another incorrect approach that solely focuses on the most readily available commercial product without a deep dive into the client's specific, nuanced needs risks overlooking critical functional requirements. This can result in a solution that is good enough but not truly optimal, potentially leading to frustration, reduced independence, and the need for future, more costly interventions. This approach neglects the core principle of individualized assessment and intervention, which is fundamental to the ATP's role. The professional decision-making process should begin with a comprehensive, client-centered needs assessment. This assessment should identify functional goals, environmental factors, and any specific challenges the client faces. Following this, the ATP should conduct a thorough market scan for commercially available solutions that address these needs. If suitable commercial options are identified, their features, benefits, drawbacks, cost, and support infrastructure should be evaluated against the client's requirements. If no commercial solution adequately meets the identified needs, or if a custom solution offers demonstrably superior outcomes that justify the potential increased cost and complexity, then the development of a custom solution should be considered. Throughout this process, ongoing communication with the client and relevant stakeholders is crucial to ensure shared understanding and buy-in. Question 10. The performance metrics show a significant improvement in a client's task completion speed after the implementation of a new communication device. However, during direct observation in the client's home environment, the ATP notes that the client frequently appears frustrated, hesitates before initiating communication, and relies heavily on pre-programmed phrases rather than spontaneous expression. Which of the following observational approaches best addresses this discrepancy to ensure the client's needs are met? Option A. Conclude that the performance metrics accurately reflect the technology's benefit and recommend continued use of the device as prescribed, assuming the client's frustration is unrelated to the technology itself. Option B. Immediately recommend a different communication device based on the observed frustration, without further exploration of the current device's usability or the client's specific communication goals. Option C. Conduct further direct observations focusing on the client's nonverbal cues of frustration and hesitation, and supplement with semi-structured interviews to explore the client's subjective experience and perceived barriers to spontaneous communication. Option D. Rely solely on the initial performance metrics, as they provide objective data on task completion speed, and dismiss the observational findings as subjective and potentially influenced by external factors. The correct answer is C. Conduct further direct observations focusing on the client's nonverbal cues of frustration and hesitation, and supplement with semi-structured interviews to explore the client's subjective experience and perceived barriers to spontaneous communication. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the assistive technology professional is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of an assistive technology intervention using observational methods, but the observed data appears to contradict the initial performance metrics. The ATP must reconcile these discrepancies while adhering to professional standards and ethical guidelines. The challenge lies in interpreting subjective observations against objective, albeit potentially flawed, metrics, and making a recommendation that prioritizes the client's functional outcomes and autonomy. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes direct, client-centered observation and qualitative data collection to understand the nuances of technology use in the client's natural environment. This aligns with the core principles of assistive technology service delivery, which emphasize functional assessment and client satisfaction. By conducting further direct observation and gathering qualitative feedback, the ATP is actively seeking to understand the client's experience, identify barriers or facilitators to effective use, and ensure the technology truly meets their needs. This approach is ethically sound as it places the client's well-being and functional independence at the forefront, moving beyond potentially misleading quantitative data. It also adheres to professional guidelines that advocate for comprehensive and individualized assessments. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial performance metrics without further investigation fails to acknowledge the limitations of such metrics and the importance of real-world application. This could lead to an inaccurate conclusion about the technology's effectiveness, potentially resulting in continued use of an inappropriate or underutilized device, which is ethically problematic as it does not serve the client's best interests. Another incorrect approach that dismisses observational data in favor of the metrics overlooks the subjective experience and functional impact on the client, which are critical components of assistive technology assessment. This approach risks making decisions based on incomplete or misleading information, potentially leading to suboptimal outcomes and a failure to uphold the client's right to effective and appropriate assistive technology. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a critical evaluation of all available data, both quantitative and qualitative. When discrepancies arise, the framework should mandate further investigation, prioritizing direct observation and client feedback to understand the context and lived experience. This iterative process ensures that recommendations are evidence-based, client-centered, and ethically sound, ultimately promoting the client's independence and quality of life. Question 11. The assessment process reveals a client who requires a specialized seating system to maintain postural support during daily activities and a communication device that utilizes eye gaze technology to enable verbal expression. Which of the following best defines the primary purpose of these interventions as assistive technology? Option A. To offer general support and enhance the client's overall quality of life. Option B. To increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of the individual with a disability. Option C. To serve as standard medical equipment and a general communication aid. Option D. To provide comfort and facilitate communication for the client. The correct answer is D. To provide comfort and facilitate communication for the client. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a client with a complex set of needs, including significant mobility impairments and communication challenges. The professional challenge lies in accurately defining and categorizing the interventions required, ensuring they align with the established definition of assistive technology as per the Assistive Technology Professional certification framework. Misclassifying an intervention can lead to inappropriate service delivery, funding issues, and ultimately, failure to meet the client's functional goals. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres strictly to the established definition of assistive technology, which encompasses any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. This aligns with the core principles of AT provision, emphasizing functional improvement and independence. By focusing on the purpose and function of the intervention in relation to the client's disability, the professional ensures that the proposed solution is indeed AT and not a general medical service or educational support that falls outside the ATP scope. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the cost of an item, regardless of its functional purpose, fails to meet the definition of AT. ATP certification framework prioritizes functional outcomes over financial considerations when defining AT. Another incorrect approach that categorizes a general educational tool as AT without demonstrating its specific role in overcoming a disability-related barrier misinterprets the scope of AT. AT is not simply any tool used by a person with a disability. It must directly address a functional limitation. Finally, an approach that considers a service rather than a device or system, as AT also deviates from the established definition. While services are crucial in AT provision, the AT itself refers to the tangible or system-based intervention. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's functional limitations and goals. They must then evaluate potential interventions against the established definition of assistive technology, considering its purpose, function, and how it directly addresses the identified barriers. This involves distinguishing AT from other types of support services or general equipment, ensuring that the proposed solutions are appropriate, effective, and fall within the professional scope of practice as defined by the ATP certification. Question 12. Strategic planning requires an assistive technology professional to consider the full lifecycle impact of recommended devices. When evaluating options for a client who requires a new communication device, which of the following approaches best integrates environmental considerations into the decision-making process? Option A. Recommending the least expensive communication device available to ensure immediate affordability, without investigating its manufacturing or disposal impact. Option B. Researching and presenting options that prioritize energy efficiency, durability, and responsible end-of-life disposal, while also meeting the client's functional needs and budget. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the device's advanced features and user interface, assuming that environmental factors are secondary to immediate functional performance. Option D. Selecting the communication device that is most widely recognized and has the most readily available technical support, irrespective of its environmental footprint. The correct answer is B. Researching and presenting options that prioritize energy efficiency, durability, and responsible end-of-life disposal, while also meeting the client's functional needs and budget. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the client's immediate functional needs with long-term environmental sustainability and the ethical imperative to recommend solutions that are both effective and responsible. The ATP must consider the lifecycle impact of assistive technology, not just its initial utility. This involves understanding potential waste streams, energy consumption, and the availability of sustainable alternatives, all within the context of client autonomy and resource limitations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a holistic assessment that integrates environmental considerations into the assistive technology selection process. This aligns with the ethical principles of beneficence, acting in the client's best interest, which includes long-term well-being, and non-maleficence, avoiding harm, which can include environmental harm. It also reflects a forward-thinking approach to AT provision, acknowledging the growing importance of sustainability in all professional fields. By actively seeking out and recommending environmentally conscious options, the ATP demonstrates a commitment to responsible practice that extends beyond the immediate client interaction. This approach also empowers the client with information about sustainable choices, fostering informed decision-making. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach fails to consider environmental impact by solely focusing on the most readily available or familiar technology, regardless of its manufacturing, energy consumption, or disposal implications. This represents an ethical failure to act with due diligence and to explore all reasonable options that could benefit the client and minimize negative externalities. It neglects the broader responsibility of the professional to consider the wider consequences of their recommendations. Another incorrect approach might prioritize the lowest initial cost without evaluating the long-term environmental costs associated with a less sustainable product, such as higher energy usage or a shorter lifespan, leading to more frequent replacement and waste. This is an ethical lapse as it prioritizes short-term financial gain over long-term environmental and potentially even client cost-effectiveness, failing to uphold the principle of providing the most appropriate and sustainable solution. A third incorrect approach could involve recommending technology without inquiring about the client's environmental values or preferences, thereby potentially overlooking opportunities to align at choices with the client's personal commitment to sustainability. This is a failure in client-centered practice, as it does not fully explore the client's holistic needs and values, which may include environmental stewardship. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough needs assessment, followed by an exploration of all available options. This exploration must explicitly include an evaluation of environmental factors such as energy efficiency, material sourcing, durability, repairability, and end-of-life disposal. The ATP should then present a range of suitable options to the client, clearly outlining the pros and cons of each, including their environmental implications, alongside functional and financial considerations. The final decision rests with the client, but the ATP has an ethical obligation to provide comprehensive, responsible information to facilitate an informed choice. Question 13. Investigation of a user's request for a specific high-profile assistive technology device, which they saw demonstrated online, requires the ATP to optimize the design process by Option A. Immediately procuring the requested device as the user has expressed a clear preference, assuming their online research indicates its suitability. Option B. Conducting a thorough functional assessment to understand the user's specific needs and environmental context, then collaboratively exploring technology options that best meet those needs, including the requested device if appropriate, and involving the user in iterative testing and refinement. Option C. Proceeding with the requested device based on the user's enthusiasm, without a detailed functional assessment, to ensure client satisfaction and avoid potential delays. Option D. Recommending a different, more established assistive technology that the ATP has successfully implemented in similar cases, without extensive further user input on the specific requested device. Correct answer is B. Conducting a thorough functional assessment to understand the user's specific needs and environmental context, then collaboratively exploring technology options that best meet those needs, including the requested device if appropriate, and involving the user in iterative testing and refinement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the assistive technology professional must balance the immediate perceived need of the user with the long-term effectiveness and ethical implications of the technology selection. The user's stated preference, while important, may not align with their actual functional needs or the most sustainable and empowering solution. Careful judgment is required to ensure the technology truly enhances independence and participation, rather than creating new barriers or dependencies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, user-centered assessment process. This aligns with the core principles of assistive technology service delivery, which emphasize understanding the individual's goals, environment, and capabilities before recommending a solution. By involving the user in iterative design and testing, the ATP ensures the technology is not only functional but also acceptable and usable in the user's daily life. This iterative process is implicitly supported by professional ethical guidelines that mandate client-centered care and evidence-based practice, ensuring that decisions are informed by the user's lived experience and objective assessment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the user's initial request without further investigation fails to uphold the ethical obligation to provide the most appropriate and effective solution. This could lead to a suboptimal outcome, where the technology does not adequately address the underlying functional challenges, potentially causing frustration and hindering progress. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes a readily available or familiar technology over a more tailored solution neglects the principle of individualized service and may not meet the user's unique needs, thereby failing to maximize their potential for independence. A third incorrect approach that bypasses user input in favor of a clinician's predetermined solution directly violates the user-centered design principles and ethical mandates for informed consent and shared decision-making. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough needs assessment, incorporating the user's stated goals and preferences alongside objective functional evaluations. This should be followed by exploring a range of potential solutions, considering their features, benefits, and limitations in the context of the user's environment and resources. Crucially, the process must include opportunities for user feedback and iterative refinement, ensuring the chosen technology is a collaborative outcome. This systematic approach, grounded in user-centered design and ethical practice, maximizes the likelihood of a successful and empowering assistive technology intervention. Question 14. What factors determine the most appropriate performance-based assessment methodology for evaluating an individual's need for and potential benefit from assistive technology in their daily life? Option A. The results of standardized cognitive assessments, irrespective of functional context. Option B. The individual's functional performance in their natural environments and their stated personal goals. Option C. The availability of specific assistive technology devices within the service provider's inventory. Option D. The individual's primary medical diagnosis and the typical assistive technology prescribed for that condition. The correct answer is B. The individual's functional performance in their natural environments and their stated personal goals. Explanation. The scenario of determining the appropriate performance-based assessment for an individual seeking assistive technology at services presents a professionally challenging situation. It requires a nuanced understanding of the individual's functional needs, environmental context, and the specific capabilities of various solutions, all while adhering to professional standards and ethical guidelines. The challenge lies in selecting an assessment method that is not only accurate and reliable, but also respects the individual's autonomy and promotes their participation in the decision-making process. Careful judgment is required to avoid biases, ensure cultural sensitivity, and select an assessment that truly reflects the individual's real-world performance and potential for benefit. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive, individualized, and functional evaluation. This aligns with the core principles of service delivery, which emphasize person-centered planning and outcomes. By focusing on performance in natural environments and considering the individual's goals and preferences, the assessment directly informs the selection of that is most likely to be effective and lead to meaningful improvements in participation and independence. This approach is ethically sound as it respects the individual's right to self-determination and ensures that recommendations are evidence-based and tailored to their unique circumstances. Regulatory frameworks for professionals often mandate such individualized and functional assessments to ensure the responsible and effective provision of services. Incorrect approaches fail to meet professional and ethical standards for several reasons. An approach that relies solely on standardized, decontextualized tests without considering the individual's specific environment or functional goals is ethically problematic, because it may not accurately reflect the individual's needs or the potential benefit of in their daily life. This can lead to inappropriate recommendations, wasted resources, and frustration for the individual. Such an approach also risks violating principles of informed consent if the individual is not fully aware of the limitations of the assessment. An approach that prioritizes the availability of specific devices over the individual's demonstrated needs and performance is a clear ethical failure. This can lead to a solution looking for a problem scenario, where is recommended not because it is truly needed or beneficial, but because it is readily accessible or familiar to the provider. This violates the principle of beneficence and can result in harm or lack of benefit. Furthermore, it may contravene regulations that require recommendations to be based on a thorough assessment of need. An approach that focuses exclusively on the individual's diagnosis without considering their functional abilities and environmental barriers is also flawed. While a diagnosis is important context, it should not be the sole determinant of needs. Over-reliance on diagnosis can lead to stereotyping and overlooking unique strengths and challenges, thereby failing to provide truly individualized support and potentially violating principles of equity and non-discrimination. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, clearly define the individual's goals and priorities through active listening and collaborative discussion. Second, conduct a functional assessment that observes the individual performing relevant tasks in their natural environments, considering all relevant contextual factors. Third, analyze the observed performance data in conjunction with the individual's goals and diagnostic information to identify specific barriers and potential solutions. Fourth, involve the individual in evaluating potential options, considering their usability, affordability, and long-term support needs. Finally, document the assessment process, rationale for recommendations, and the individual's informed consent, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the service delivery process. Question 15. When evaluating assistive technology solutions for a client with a disability and considering the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) requirements for reasonable accommodation, which approach best ensures compliance and effectiveness? Option A. Recommending the least expensive assistive technology option available, assuming it will meet basic functional needs and ADA requirements. Option B. Focusing solely on the client's stated preference for a particular assistive technology, without independently verifying its effectiveness or suitability for their specific situation. Option C. Prioritizing a solution that is technically advanced and offers the widest range of features, regardless of the client's specific functional needs or budget. Option D. Conducting a thorough assessment of the client's functional limitations, environmental context, and personal goals, then recommending the most appropriate and effective assistive technology that meets ADA standards for reasonable accommodation. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing a solution that is technically advanced and offers the widest range of features, regardless of the client's specific functional needs or budget. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the specific needs of an individual with assistive technology against the broader requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) and the ethical obligations of an assistive technology professional. The ATP must navigate potential conflicts between a client's expressed preferences, the technical feasibility of a solution, and the legal mandate to provide reasonable accommodations. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the proposed solution is not only effective for the individual, but also compliant with ADA principles, which emphasize equal access and opportunity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, individualized assessment that directly addresses the client's functional limitations and the specific environment in which the assistive technology will be used. This aligns with the ADA focus on providing accommodations that are effective and tailored to the individual's needs. By considering the client's goals, the technical capabilities of the AT, and the legal framework, the ATP ensures that the recommendation is both appropriate and legally sound, upholding the spirit of the ADA to promote inclusion and participation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most technologically advanced or expensive option fails to consider the principle of reasonableness inherent in the ADA. The ADA does not mandate the most cutting-edge or costly solution, but rather one that is effective. Recommending a solution without a comprehensive assessment of the client's specific needs and environment ignores the individualized nature of accommodations and could lead to an ineffective or inappropriate recommendation, potentially violating the ADA intent. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the client's preferences without objective justification risks alienating the client and may overlook a viable, albeit less complex, solution that would still meet ADA requirements. This can also lead to an ineffective outcome if the client is unwilling or unable to use the recommended technology. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive client assessment, including understanding their functional needs, environmental context, and personal goals. This should be followed by an exploration of available assistive technology options, considering their effectiveness, cost, and feasibility. Crucially, the ATP must then evaluate these options against the requirements of the ADA, ensuring that any proposed accommodation is reasonable and effective. Open communication with the client throughout this process is paramount, allowing for collaborative decision-making and ensuring that the final recommendation is both technically sound and aligned with the client's preferences and legal rights. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that many school districts are exploring cost-effective strategies for providing assistive technology at services. A district is considering implementing a new initiative to identify and procure AT for students with disabilities. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, for AT provision? Option A. Implementing a district-wide AT needs assessment survey for all students identified with disabilities, with results used to inform a general AT procurement plan. Option B. Focusing AT procurement on technology that has demonstrated broad utility across multiple disability types, assuming this will meet the majority of student needs. Option C. Developing a standardized AT toolkit based on common disability categories, which is then distributed to all students within those categories without further individual assessment. Option D. Requiring the IEP team to conduct an individualized assessment of each student's AT needs as part of the IEP development process, ensuring that AT is considered a component of special education and related services. The correct answer is A. Implementing a district-wide AT needs assessment survey for all students identified with disabilities, with results used to inform a general AT procurement plan. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a school district's desire to streamline services and the legal mandate to provide individualized support under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. The challenge lies in ensuring that any broad initiative does not inadvertently compromise the specific, legally required processes for identifying, evaluating, and providing assistive technology to students with disabilities. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with compliance and the fundamental principle of individualized education programs, EAP. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to IDEA core tenets. Specifically, it acknowledges that AT services are a component of special education and related services, and as such, must be determined on an individual basis by the IEP team. This approach ensures that the unique needs of each student are assessed and addressed, aligning with the Free Appropriate Public Education (FAPE) guarantee. It also respects the procedural safeguards outlined in IDEA, which empower parents and require the district to follow specific steps in the IEP development process. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on a district-wide AT assessment without individual student consideration fails to recognize that IDEA mandates individualized assessments and services. This approach risks violating the spirit and letter of IDEA by imposing a one-size-fits-all solution, potentially leading to students not receiving the specific AT they require to access their education. Ethically, it is a failure to uphold the principle of individualized support. Another incorrect approach that relies on a general technology survey to identify AT needs bypasses the crucial role of the IEP team and the specific evaluation procedures required by IDEA. While surveys can be a starting point, they cannot replace the comprehensive, individualized assessment process that determines the necessity and type of AT for a student's educational benefit. This approach is a procedural failure under IDEA and an ethical lapse in providing appropriate services. A third incorrect approach that assumes all students with a particular disability automatically qualify for specific AT overlooks the individualized nature of AT needs. IDEA requires an assessment of each student's unique needs, not a blanket assumption based on disability category. This approach is a direct violation of the individualized assessment requirement and can lead to both underprovision and overprovision of AT, neither of which serves the student's best interests or complies with IDEA. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of IDEA requirements regarding AT. Professionals must then evaluate any proposed initiative against these legal mandates, focusing on how it impacts the individualized assessment and IEP development process. The guiding principle should always be the student's right to FAPE, which includes the provision of necessary AT as determined by the IEP team. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel specializing in special education law or experienced special education administrators is advisable. Question 17. The audit findings indicate a pattern of insufficient documentation supporting the justification for powered wheelchair prescriptions, specifically regarding the detailed functional limitations and environmental barriers that preclude the effective use of manual wheelchairs. Which of the following approaches best addresses this audit finding while adhering to professional standards for assistive technology provision? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive functional assessment that objectively measures the individual's ability to propel a manual wheelchair in various relevant environments, documenting specific limitations and how these limitations directly necessitate the features and functions of a powered wheelchair to achieve independence and safety. Option B. Retroactively add detailed functional assessment notes to existing client records to align with the audit's requirements. Option C. Rely on the individual's subjective report of difficulty propelling a manual wheelchair without further objective functional evaluation or environmental analysis. Option D. Include a general statement in the client's record indicating that the individual expressed a strong preference for a powered wheelchair over a manual option. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive functional assessment that objectively measures the individual's ability to propel a manual wheelchair in various relevant environments, documenting specific limitations and how these limitations directly necessitate the features and functions of a powered wheelchair to achieve independence and safety. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a recurring issue with the documentation supporting the justification for powered wheelchair prescriptions. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the integrity of patient care documentation, potentially jeopardizes reimbursement, and raises questions about adherence to established guidelines for assistive technology provision. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the clinical need for appropriate mobility with the administrative and regulatory requirements for substantiating that need. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based assessment that directly addresses the specific functional limitations and environmental factors necessitating a powered wheelchair. This aligns with the principles of person-centered care and the ethical obligation to provide the most appropriate and effective assistive technology. Specifically, it requires demonstrating how the individual's functional impairments, as documented by objective measures and functional assessments, cannot be adequately met by a manual wheelchair, and how the powered wheelchair will enhance independence, safety, and participation in meaningful activities. This approach ensures that the prescription is not only clinically sound, but also defensible under regulatory scrutiny, reflecting a commitment to quality service delivery and responsible resource utilization. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a general statement of difficulty propelling a manual wheelchair without specific functional data or environmental considerations fails to meet the required standard of documentation. This is a regulatory failure because it lacks the specific evidence needed to justify the significant functional and financial implications of a powered wheelchair. Ethically, it risks overprescribing technology that may not be the most appropriate solution, potentially leading to suboptimal outcomes for the individual. Another incorrect approach, focusing primarily on the individual's desire for a powered wheelchair without a comprehensive functional assessment, represents an ethical failure. While client preference is important, it cannot supersede the clinical necessity and objective justification required for such a significant intervention. This approach neglects the professional responsibility to ensure the technology is medically necessary and will provide a tangible benefit that outweighs the risks and costs. It also poses a regulatory risk by not providing the documented evidence of functional impairment that payers and regulatory bodies require. A third incorrect approach, which involves retroactively adding documentation to existing records without a contemporaneous assessment, is both an ethical and regulatory failure. This constitutes falsification of records, undermining the integrity of the professional process and potentially leading to fraudulent claims. It demonstrates a lack of commitment to accurate and transparent documentation, which is fundamental to professional accountability and patient safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach to assessment and documentation. This includes conducting a comprehensive evaluation of the individual's functional abilities, environmental context, and specific goals. The assessment should utilize objective measures and functional outcome tools to quantify limitations. The justification for the prescribed technology must directly link these limitations to the benefits the technology will provide, clearly articulating why less complex or less costly options are insufficient. Documentation should be contemporaneous, detailed, and clearly reflect the clinical reasoning and evidence supporting the recommendation. Professionals must remain vigilant about evolving regulatory requirements and ethical standards in assistive technology provision. Question 18. The efficiency study reveals that a significant number of individuals who received new assistive technology are not consistently utilizing it to its full potential. Which of the following approaches to training and support is most likely to foster long-term user independence and successful technology integration? Option A. Implementing a comprehensive, individualized training program that includes hands-on practice, ongoing follow-up sessions tailored to the user's progress and challenges, and readily accessible resources for continued learning and troubleshooting. Option B. Delivering generic training materials and expecting users to adapt them to their specific needs and learning styles without direct professional guidance. Option C. Focusing exclusively on the technical features of the assistive technology during initial training, with no planned follow-up or support mechanisms. Option D. Providing a single, standardized training session immediately after device deployment, assuming users will independently seek further assistance if needed. The correct answer is A. Implementing a comprehensive, individualized training program that includes hands-on practice, ongoing follow-up sessions tailored to the user's progress and challenges, and readily accessible resources for continued learning and troubleshooting. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in assistive technology provision, ensuring that the technology, once implemented, is effectively utilized by the end user to achieve their functional goals. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond mere device provision to fostering genuine user independence and competence. This requires a nuanced understanding of adult learning principles, individual user needs, and the ongoing nature of support. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a user-centered, individualized, and iterative process for training and support. This aligns with the core ethical principles of the assistive technology professional AT certification, which emphasize maximizing user autonomy, promoting functional independence, and ensuring the provision of services that are appropriate and effective for the individual. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to ongoing assessment and adaptation, recognizing that initial training may not be sufficient and that users may require varied forms of support over time. This approach respects the user's learning pace and style, fostering confidence and long-term success with the assistive technology. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on initial, one-time training fails to acknowledge the complexities of learning new technologies, especially for individuals with disabilities who may have unique learning needs or require ongoing reinforcement. This can lead to underutilization or abandonment of the technology, failing to meet the user's functional goals and potentially violating ethical obligations to provide effective services. Another incorrect approach that relies on generic, standardized training materials overlooks the critical need for personalization. Assistive technology is inherently individualized, and training must reflect the specific device configuration, the user's unique environment, and their personal objectives. A failure to individualize training can result in information overload, confusion, and a lack of perceived relevance, hindering adoption. Lastly, an approach that assumes the user will seek out additional support independently, without proactive follow-up or readily available resources, places an undue burden on the user and neglects the professional's responsibility to ensure successful integration of the technology. This reactive stance can leave users feeling unsupported and frustrated, ultimately undermining the benefits of the assistive technology. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the user's learning style, cognitive abilities, and environmental context. This assessment should inform the development of a personalized training plan that includes a variety of methods and allows for flexibility. Ongoing follow-up, proactive check-ins, and the establishment of clear channels for ongoing support are crucial components. Professionals must also be prepared to adapt their training strategies based on user feedback and observed progress, recognizing that training is not a static event but an ongoing process. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new assistive technology requires a thorough understanding of user needs and environmental factors. To optimize the data collection process for this assessment, which approach would best balance comprehensive information gathering with efficient client engagement and data reliability? Option A. Conduct a detailed, semi-structured interview to explore the client's experiences and challenges, followed by a concise, targeted survey to quantify specific aspects identified during the interview. Option B. Engage in a brief, informal conversation with the client to gauge general needs, without any structured follow-up or detailed data collection instruments. Option C. Administer a lengthy, comprehensive survey that covers all potential aspects of use and environmental factors, assuming clients can provide accurate and complete information without further clarification. Option D. Utilize a complex, multi-stage survey requiring advanced statistical analysis, assuming the client has the technical proficiency and time to complete it accurately without additional support. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed, semi-structured interview to explore the client's experiences and challenges, followed by a concise, targeted survey to quantify specific aspects identified during the interview. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an assistive technology professional to balance the perceived benefits of a new technology with the practical realities of client engagement and data collection. The ATP must navigate potential biases in self-reported data and ensure that the chosen method for gathering information is both effective and ethically sound, respecting client autonomy and privacy. The challenge lies in optimizing the process to yield reliable insights without overburdening the client or compromising the integrity of the assessment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves a structured interview with open-ended questions followed by a brief, targeted survey, represents best professional practice. This method leverages the depth of qualitative data from interviews to understand the client's lived experience, nuances, and contextual factors that a survey alone might miss. The subsequent survey then efficiently quantifies specific aspects identified in the interview, providing a more robust and validated dataset. This blended approach aligns with ethical guidelines for client-centered practice, ensuring that the ATP gathers comprehensive information while respecting the client's time and cognitive load. It also adheres to principles of data integrity by triangulating information from different sources. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach, relying solely on a lengthy, detailed survey, fails to capture the qualitative richness and individual context essential for effective assessment. This can lead to superficial understanding and potentially inappropriate recommendations, violating the ethical obligation to provide client-centered services. It also risks overwhelming the client, leading to survey fatigue and inaccurate responses, compromising data reliability. Another incorrect approach, conducting only a brief, informal interview without any structured follow-up, may yield anecdotal information but lacks the systematic data collection needed for a thorough cost-benefit analysis of solutions. This approach risks missing critical details and may not provide sufficient evidence to justify recommendations, potentially leading to suboptimal outcomes for the client and inefficient use of resources. It also falls short of the professional standard for comprehensive assessment. A third incorrect approach, using a complex, multi-stage survey with advanced statistical requirements without adequate client training or support, is ethically problematic. It places an undue burden on the client and may result in data that is not representative of their actual needs or experiences due to comprehension or technical barriers. This violates the principle of providing accessible and equitable services and can lead to flawed conclusions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client needs and ethical considerations. This involves understanding the strengths and limitations of various data collection methods. A systematic approach, starting with understanding the client's perspective through interviews and then using surveys to gather specific, quantifiable data, allows for a comprehensive and client-centered assessment. Professionals must continuously evaluate the effectiveness and ethical implications of their chosen methods, adapting as necessary to ensure the best possible outcomes for the individuals they serve. Question 20. The efficiency study reveals that a standard, widely available, and lower-cost assistive technology device could potentially address some of the user's immediate functional challenges, but a more specialized, higher-cost solution might offer greater long-term benefits and independence. The app professional must decide which recommendation to prioritize. Option A. Recommend the specialized, higher-cost solution based on its advanced features, assuming it will inherently provide superior outcomes regardless of the client's specific needs. Option B. recommend the standard lower-cost device immediately, as it meets the basic requirements identified in the efficiency study and offers immediate cost savings. Option C. Recommend the specialized, higher-cost solution after a thorough assessment of the client's specific needs, goals, and environmental context, ensuring it aligns with long-term functional independence and quality of life. Option D. Recommend the standard, lower-cost device, prioritizing the institution's or payer's perceived efficiency and cost-effectiveness over a detailed client-specific functional analysis. The correct answer is C. Recommend the specialized, higher-cost solution after a thorough assessment of the client's specific needs, goals, and environmental context, ensuring it aligns with long-term functional independence and quality of life. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in assistive technology at provision, balancing the perceived efficiency of a readily available, lower-cost solution with the client's actual functional needs and long-term well-being. The challenge lies in the professional's responsibility to advocate for the client's best interests, which may extend beyond immediate cost savings or ease of implementation. The professional must navigate potential pressure from stakeholders, e.g., funding bodies, institutions, who might prioritize cost-effectiveness over optimal client outcomes. This requires a deep understanding of principles, client-centered assessment, and ethical considerations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive, client-centered assessment that considers the individual's specific functional limitations, environmental context, and long-term goals. This aligns with the core ethical principles of practice, which emphasize client autonomy, beneficence, and non-maleficence. By conducting a thorough evaluation, the professional ensures that the recommended solution is not only functional but also appropriate, sustainable, and promotes the client's independence and quality of life. This approach is supported by professional standards and guidelines that mandate individualized assessment, and the selection of that best meets the user's needs, rather than simply the most convenient or cheapest option. The ATP certification framework emphasizes this client-first methodology. Incorrect approaches analysis, recommending the readily available, lower-cost solution without a thorough assessment, fails to uphold the principle of beneficence. It risks providing an that is inadequate, leading to frustration, decreased independence, and potentially requiring more costly interventions later. This approach could be seen as a failure to act in the client's best interest and a disregard for the individualized nature of provision. Ethically, it prioritizes expediency or cost over the client's well-being, suggesting a more expensive, feature-rich solution without a clear justification based on the client's specific needs also represents a failure in professional judgment. While aiming for optimal outcomes, this approach could lead to overservicing, unnecessary complexity, and potential financial burden on the client or funding source without a demonstrable benefit. It deviates from the principle of proportionality and responsible resource allocation, focusing solely on the institution's or payer's perceived efficiency without adequately considering the client's functional requirements is a significant ethical lapse. This approach prioritizes external pressures over the client's autonomy and right to receive that genuinely supports their participation and independence. It can lead to a solution that is technically compliant but functionally ineffective, undermining the purpose of provision. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive client assessment. This involves understanding the client's goals, functional abilities and limitations, environmental factors, and potential barriers. Following the assessment, the professional should explore a range of options, considering their features, benefits, drawbacks, cost, and sustainability. The decision-making process should be collaborative, involving the client and relevant stakeholders, with the professional acting as an informed advocate. The ultimate recommendation should be based on evidence of effectiveness for the individual client and alignment with their stated goals and needs, adhering to ethical guidelines and professional standards.